actual last web chat for this fiscal year. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time focusing on the grant applications today, but welcome everybody. My name is Brad Haskamp. I'm the Adult Secondary Credential and Education Policy Specialist here with the department. And joining me today,
Astrid Leiden, and I'm the ABE Professional Development Specialist.
And I'm Jody Versada. I'm the Program Quality Specialist.
Excellent. Unfortunately, a lot of our other colleagues like Todd, our State Director, and Julie, our Transition Specialist, were not able to join us today. They're out in Washington, D.C. You can ask your question over the phone and we'll unmute you. Also, if you have any other technical assistance issues or questions, please talk to Carla Vian, and we really are appreciative to have Carla Vian from Literacy Action Network to provide technical support and technical assistance for today's session. And that's part of Literacy Action Network and their supplemental service grants.
So here's an overview of our plan for today. So we've kind of divided today's webinar into two parts. The second part is mostly a repeat of the session that we did at the 3 regional. Free to just listen for part 1. You're also welcome, of course, to listen again to part 2, but just so you're aware that that is the plan for what we're going to talk about today.
Let's dive into some updates. First off, congratulations to Adam Kuehnel. He was a finalist for Minnesota Teacher of the Year. This is really exciting. And Adam is one of the outstanding teachers at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Faribault. He is an English language arts instructor, and he's worked with a wide variety of ABE students at all levels. And he's done a lot of sharing of curriculum, especially with our standard adult high school diploma programs. If any of you have heard of the Happyville curriculum, that's been his doing and creation. So we're very happy for Adam Kuehnel and very well deserved to earn a finalist for Minnesota Teacher of the Year. He really represents our field well, and he is an outstanding contributor to our field. He actually was featured on KARE 11, so if you want to see the news story, you can download the slides and click on that link for the KARE 11 story. But it's a great interview, and it really represents his very humble and kind personality, but a very generous personality that we have here as a stellar teacher within our Minnesota ABE system. So congratulations, Adam. We're really excited for you.
So a few updates in the PD realm. Hopefully you're all aware that we do have a statewide professional development committee that's been in existence for about 5 years now. And this is a committee that's made up of state ABE staff, our professional development providers who work through ABE Supplemental Service supported ABE Support Network. And then we have local program representatives representing different parts of the state, different roles and areas of expertise that serve on rotating 2-year terms on this committee. We meet quarterly for full-day meetings and work virtually as well in between those meetings. Some of the things that we work on include developing our annual professional development survey and analyzing that data that we use to plan professional development for a range of content areas. We work together to find topics and presenters for events, statewide and regional events throughout the year. And then we work in subcommittees on various professional development projects. Hopefully, if you read the ABE PD Connect newsletter, you saw that we are coming to the end of the 2-year term for our current group of ABE program representatives. And I want to extend my huge thanks to this group of educators from around the state that worked with the committee to plan professional development for the past 2 years. So thank you to all of those folks that have been serving. And we're now looking for a new group of representatives to serve on the committee. The application and information went out in the newsletter yesterday. It is available in that newsletter archive. We are looking for people to serve a 2-year term starting in July. They must be currently employed with one of our ABE programs and have experience working in ABE instruction administration or in support duties in an ABE program. And thanks for their participation. They are provided a stipend, and then travel costs for coming to the quarterly meetings are covered. So if you or any of your staff would be interested in getting more involved in PD planning, encourage you to apply. Applications are due May 30th. If you have any questions, you can contact me directly to ask for more information. Also want to make sure that everybody is aware of the new Atlas Applications tab on their website. This is a direct way to find out which cohorts or more extended professional development opportunities are currently open to Minnesota ABE staff. Right now, there are several applications posted on that site. The CCRS implementation cohort will be running again next year. Those applications for your teams are due on June 1st. We also will be running the Adult Career Pathway Program Development Cohort again. It was extremely successful this year, and we want to extend that opportunity again to program administrators next year. Those applications are due June 8th. And then looking ahead to the fall, we'll be running another group through Adult Career Pathway Course Design, and those are not due until September 28th. But you can watch that tab, stay current on the applications that are available. And then finally, we want to make sure that everybody is aware of some of the different discussion groups that have been started over the past couple of years using the Schoology platform. We've had a group operating for a number of years now, focused on connecting people who are working in one-room schoolhouse settings. So this is a place to ask questions, share instructional strategies, resources, etc. That's a moderated group. Melissa Bruskerum from AEOA is currently our facilitator for that group. And then we've had a number of other groups added recently. An ABE program quality standards discussion that Jody is facilitating to get field input on developing a new set of program quality standards for us. And then the standard adult diploma programs, a new Schoology group was just launched this month, and Brad is facilitating that group for people working with the standard adult diploma. And then recently we've had a correctional educator Schoology group started by Adam Kuehnel out of the Faribault Correctional site. So if you're interested in participating in any of those discussions, you have the access codes for those groups here. You will need to create a Schoology account if you don't already have one. And if you do already have one, you'll need to make sure that you have a teacher account, not a student one created. And you may need to merge accounts in your account settings to get this set up. Also want to make sure when you go on that you're looking for groups and not courses. So encourage you to get involved in some of those statewide conversations via Schoology.
I also wanted to remind folks that we have a couple more months yet to use the MN GED 10 or MN GED 10 code. All of our GED testers in the state should be using that code to get that $10 discount for the first test in each subject. As I mentioned before, we have probably used just over $40,000 of that, so maybe about a third of it at this point, or at our last check. So we really would like people to be promoting this. It is on GED.com, but people are still not necessarily using it. So make sure to forward this and make sure all of your GED students know about this code.
Okay, this is in response to a question that came up at our presentation at the North Regional. So hopefully you will all remember that there is a new, what we're calling a rolling lock in the SID database where you can't enter old data. You can't enter old attendance or old tests that are more than 3 months prior. But the question came up if that same thing is true for non-NRS assessments. So that could be, for example, the IQ-Placer, or another example is the GED. So we did talk to the SID support staff, and we were told that no, that lock does not apply. So if you get a student who comes in and they're going to pursue their adult diploma, maybe they already have some GED tests, and you want to enter those test scores in their record in SID, which makes sense, you should be able to enter those even if they are older than 3 months old. If you have trouble with that, contact Urban Planet, who are those are the folks that support SID, and the email address is support@mnabe.org.
One other question that we had at one of the regionals was a question about regarding Table 13, the financial table, and the inclusion of regional transitions funds. So the question is, should we include those regional transition funds on our Table 13, that funding table or the financial table? So there's two answers to that. First off, if you are your region's transitions fiscal agent, so you take in all the money for your region for transitions, then if you are that entity, then you should include the entire amount received for the region, and you should mark that amount of funding as part of your federal funding. However, you do not need to include any of the districts or any of the organizations or other entities that you forward that funding to as entities in column B. So include the funding amounts in column C, but do not include any subgrantees of that regional transitions funding in column B. Now, if you're not your region's fiscal agent for the transitions funds, but you do receive some funding, do not include the funding on this table in column C. So read that carefully, make sure you know it well, but there's two answers depending on whether or not you're the fiscal agent or not for that funding.
Okay, then we wanted to spend some time talking about Table B. So Table B is new this year in the annual application. It is the one table that is new. And when we did our first presentation, which was at the Metro Regional, we didn't have this table available yet. So if you attended our presentation at the Metro Regional, you didn't hear about this. If you attended in South or North, you heard about it. So we just want to make sure that everybody is on board with why this table is here and what we're asking for. So what it is it replaces the list of consortium members and subgrantees that used to be within the application document itself. So that used to be just a table that you would put responses into within the application, the Word document. So it replaces that. And in addition to that, it also includes a list of sites where regular ABE programming is offered. So that's kind of the new piece. It kind of combines something you've done every year with some additional information. Why do we have a new table? There are a couple of reasons. We are working towards better coordination with DEED and the eligible training provider list. And our hope for that is to have more seamless referrals between other programs that we are tasked with working together under WIOA. So we're working towards that. We also want to make sure that we here at the Department of Education and the Adult Literacy Hotline that we have the most updated list of ABE program sites. And we want to be able to create a document. Essentially, it was pretty difficult to do that when that was just a table embedded in a Word document and we were getting 40-some Word documents. It's pretty hard to put that all together, but having it as an Excel spreadsheet and a table there will make it easier for us to create a single list. So some tips about Table B, and then we'll actually show you a couple of examples. So make sure that you list all the consortium members, including the fiscal agent entities. So the district or the entity that is the fiscal agent should be listed first. If that member receives funds either directly from MDE as a fiscal agent or downstream funds passed from the fiscal agent to other entities, then there should be a yes in the grantee or subrecipient column. And if not, there should be a no. And if there is a yes in column C, then we want to see all of the sites, information about all sites in columns D and E. And we want to see the sites associated with the entity that is actually paying for the programming at that site. And we know there's some this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because it is possible that within your consortium, you have a site that's physically located within one school district, but it is your teacher is being paid by your fiscal agent school district, for example. So we want the sites to be listed according to the entity that is paying for the programming. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. And so we took a couple of real examples. Hopefully, shout out to Mankato folks if you're on. We might have done a little bit of your work for you here, but we wanted to show actual real examples. So this is not a complete example, but we'll kind of give you an idea of one way that this table could look. So note that you need to list the consortium name at the top, which is not necessarily a school district name, but the name for the entire consortium. So in this case, it's Mankato Area ABE. Then the fiscal agent entity is Mankato Public Schools. So that's listed first with the district number. They are the grantee. And then Mankato has, I believe they have more than 2 sites, but there are at least these 2 sites. So one is the Lincoln Community Center in Mankato, and another site is the New Ulm Public Library. So note that the New Ulm Public Library is located in New Ulm, obviously, and the New Ulm Public School District is a member of the consortium, but Mankato is the district, the entity that funds the teacher and the programming at the New Ulm Public Library, so it's listed as a site under Mankato Public Schools. So that's one example of what a table B might look like. We're going to give you one more example that looks a little bit different. This one is for St. Paul. So the name of the consortium is the St. Paul Community Literacy Consortium, which is SPCLC. Again, this is not exhaustive. We know that SPCLC has more members than this, but we're just giving you a few to get some examples. So the fiscal agent entity is St. Paul Public Schools, which is a grantee. There are more than 2 sites, but for this example, we're including 2 sites, 2 locations where programming happens that is funded by St. Paul Public Schools. Then the fiscal agent in this case is passing on funding to other members. In this case, the other members are not school districts, so they don't have school district numbers listed. They are subrecipients because they're getting funds, and they also have sites. In one of these, you'll notice one member has 1 site, another member has more than 1 site. So we thought it might be helpful for you to have some actual examples of what this could look like. And I think
yes, we've had a couple questions come in.
Yep.
So we have a question. If we are a consortium of 1, we merely enter our consortium information, correct?
That is correct.
Yep. So you're just going to have something on the first line, but you may have more than 1 site within your one entity. So you might have more than 1 site listed. But yeah, then you would only have 1 entity listed under district or organization.
You'll have a much shorter list than potentially some of our others like Southwest ABE.
Right.
Sally, I am unmuting you. You're muted on your end. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. I see you have your hand up. Go ahead, Sally.
Oh, hi, this is Sally. So we have a class at Century College where 3 different programs, Roseville and North St. or Harmony and Mounds View, all pay for it.
Okay.
How do you list that one?
Which would you say is is there one organization that's kind of the lead on that? Like, who coordinates it?
Okay, we'll just pick one then. That'll work.
If you have a site that's split and it seems pretty equal, we would recommend just putting it under the fiscal agent for the consortium. But yeah, you can just pick one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and Marilyn's question, and maybe Marilyn, we might want to unmute you. Marilyn is asking about a collaborative where there are no paid teachers, but they have volunteer-led classes that they support with testing and curriculum.
So in a case like that, if that organization is not receiving any funds, then it would just be listed as a programming site under the fiscal agent. And if it's all volunteer-led, then who's operating the program in terms of like doing the testing, kind of who is in charge of the program overall, providing the majority of the resources. It's helpful to note that no organization that's listed as a member of your consortium, if it's listed as no under grantee or subrecipient, there should be no programming sites there. There should only be programming sites after or under entities that are either a grantee or a subrecipient, because they have resources from ABE grants in order to operate that site, whether they're paying for the teachers or the materials.
Pat Adams, go ahead and unmute yourself. We'll take your question. You'll need to click on the microphone icon on your end to unmute yourself.
I didn't have a question. I didn't have a question. I don't know how that happened.
Your hand is up.
Well, it's always nice to hear from you.
If we have members, though, maybe I could ask this question. We have members who run their own programs, and at the end of the year, they do invoice for all the expenses. Then we would consider them a subrecipient, correct?
So they invoice for expenses, and then you are then...
They hire their own staff, they run their own site. At the end of the year, they invoice us for those expenses.
And you pay for it out of your ABE grant?
Correct.
And does that include staffing?
Yes.
Yes, then that would be a subrecipient.
That's a subrecipient, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think we had
one
more here. Sarah is asking, what about local jail sites? Do we list them as programming sites? Yes, if you have regularly scheduled programming there, you do.
Even though that deed might not be referring a lot of people to that site.
Yes, we do want to know about sites and correctional facilities. Yep.
Jill asked if we have class at the local college, library, and high school, do we need to put them all down?
Yes, that's regular programming, meaning it's regularly operating.
Yes. Yeah, if you are just doing something very temporary, like you have an arrangement with a local business that's only for 3 weeks or something, we don't need that on this list. But if it's someplace that you offer ongoing ABE programming, yes.
Okay. And Tracy's asking for confirmation for AEOA. AEOA will go on line 1 and have many programming sites and addresses. Then after that part, I would list all of the school districts that are part of their region.
That is correct. And all those school districts, I assume, then would be an N, meaning they're not a subrecipient. Yep.
Marilyn's asking for clarification. So if we don't pay the collaboratives, they should not be listed.
They should not be listed as a subrecipient. It depends. Oh, go ahead.
I would say that they should be listed if they are included in your consortium membership agreement.
Right.
So it's possible that you could have a member that's part of that agreement that there's no money that goes back and forth. So if your consortium should have a membership agreement with all the districts and could have other entities. If they are on that agreement, they should be listed as a district or under column A here. Yeah. If they're not in that agreement, then they would probably just be a programming site.
Yep.
Okay. I think we've gotten all the questions. If there's anyone else who needs further clarification, go ahead and type in your question or raise your hand. Okay, one more question here. If we do not have a program site in the school district that is part of our consortium, they are listed as N for recipient.
Yep, so you're going to list them as a district in column A as a member of your consortium, but then as a subrecipient, you'll say N, meaning no, they're not receiving any ABE funding, and then that means there'll be no programming sites after them. Yep.
Okay. So I think this is kind of our break point. That is all of the new information that we had to share with you. We're grateful for your questions. Hopefully we've answered them all. At this point, if you want to hop off because you've already heard the rest, go ahead and do that. If you are sticking with us and you have other unrelated questions, why don't you hang on to those? We'll have another opportunity for questions at the end.
So we have a follow-up question from Sarah about the jail. So she's saying that the jail is paying for the cost of the instructor. So then in that case, do we need to list them? Where do we list them?
Are they part of your consortium?
Are they a member? Are they a member of your consortium and signing the the consortium membership agreement? If the answer to that is no, then you would list them as a programming site under your fiscal agent. In Sarah's case, that would be Fergus Falls Public Schools. But if they were, then they would be listed as a member with their own programming sites.
Right. So the entities you list in column A are any entity receiving ABE funding, either as the fiscal agent or that the fiscal agent is passing on that money, and any entity that is in your consortium membership agreement. Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, then I think we will keep going. So welcome again.
Yep. So now this part is going to be our grant application session, sharing the information that we shared at the regional events. So you can see here, this is a list of topics that we're going to discuss over the next hour. And let's kick it off over to Astrid to talk about some upcoming PD opportunities.
Okay, great, thanks. So we want to make sure that you're all aware that we've got an exciting event coming up on June 1st. Everyone who has previously been through STAR training, either instructors or managers, we are having an all-STAR and CCRS event at Hamline University. This is an opportunity to get some updates about Minnesota STAR and some of our assessment practices and other things that are coming down the pike with STAR. And then we're going to have a number of breakout sessions focusing on the intersection between STAR and CCRS. So how do they fit together? Where are the gaps? How can you approach both of these for effective reading instruction in your program? So you should have received an invitation from Marn. You can also get information about registering for this event on the Atlas website. So we hope to see all of the STAR trained staff out there at this event coming up. Also looking ahead to Summer Institute, poster session proposals are still being accepted, and we encourage you, if you weren't able to get in a concurrent session proposal, this is another opportunity for you or your staff to share the exciting things that are happening in your program. We will be running the pre-conference sessions again. ABE Foundations is an opportunity for newer staff to get an overview of the basics and get started with what they need to know about working in adult basic education. That is for ABE instructors or administrators or support staff. We'll also be running both the CCRS English Language Arts and CCRS Math Foundations as two separate pre-conference workshops. If you have any staff that have not been through this yet, this is a great opportunity to get this face-to-face training. And as a reminder, you do need to have participated in the CCRS Foundation training in order to go through the CCRS cohort and some of the more advanced CCRS training. Yes, as I mentioned, we are currently taking applications for our FY19 CCRS implementation cohort. So this, just to recap, is an opportunity to get a full year of professional development focused on aligning materials, instruction, and observation to the CCR standards. It allows programs to get some support in developing a program CCRS implementation plan, which is now part of the narrative. We're taking applications for teams from programs. So we're asking for at least one administrator, one ELA teacher, and one math teacher. However, if you have a smaller program and that configuration doesn't work, just reach out to us and we can certainly be flexible on that. So those applications are due June 1st. We're also, as I mentioned, running our ACP program development and course design cohorts again next year. So get your applications in for those. We had a great group of about 24 administrators go through the program development cohort this year. We're going to be wrapping up in just a couple weeks. that cohort. So you can reach out to one of your colleagues in the region that has gone through that to get some more information. But this is a really great opportunity to develop some goals around building workforce partnerships, working with employers, and building enrollment in your career pathway programming. And then just wanted to give you a heads up about the various dates coming up next year. Looking ahead, we've got dates for regionals as well as most of our statewide conferences. We will be having the Support Services Conference on November 8th and 9th, Volunteer Management Conference on November 30th, and then Fall North Regional is October 25th and 26th, and South Regional will be November 2nd. And then looking ahead to next winter, Language and Literacy Institute, the 24th and 25th. We'll be having 3 spring regionals, the 22nd of March in the Metro, the 28th and 29th in the North, and April 12th in the South. And then the Minnesota Council of Teachers of Mathematics Conference coming up on April 25th and 27th. And again, encourage you to download this PowerPoint from the materials section so you have all of those dates as you're creating your calendar for next year.
Okay, thank you, Astrid. Now we're getting to the ABE annual grant application section. And the way we decided to present this year was to really break it down by how does this funding get to the department and how does it leave the department. And so we're going to start with our 2 main types or buckets of funding. Our state ABE funding, which is estimated to be around $49 million, which is allocated from the state legislature. And then our federal ABE funding, which is estimated, our chunk is about $6 million. And that is an allocation through a formula through the U.S. Department of Education under WIOA Title II from the Congress. And as we look here, so you can see here from 2013 to 2018, these are the funding trends overall. What you'll see overall is that our state ABE aid has grown. That's been our major source of growth. But you see, especially from 17 to 18, we're stalled. And in fact, we had a slight cut from 17 to 18, and that was just due to like carryover funds, a factor that happens here at the department. Federal ABE funding continues to be fairly flat. We get little dips here and there, but basically around $5 million. And then one subset of our federal federal money, in addition to the regular ABE funding, is the IEL Civics funding. And so that's almost $1 million, about 1/6 of our ABE funding federally. But this is worrisome because it does look like our funding is flat or potentially shrinking long term. So let's first talk about the big bucket, state ABE funding, that $49 million. So that $49 million that's allocated by the state ABE legislature, no, not the ABE legislature, the state legislature here in Minnesota, 97% of that goes out directly through consortium grants for all of you applying for state funding. The other 3% goes towards ABE Supplemental Services, and those are out for competitive grants. In addition, though, the legislature and the department allocate 1.75 staff to oversee that. Actually, that's not really to oversee that. That's to operate the GED office, but provides some leadership of the ABE funds. In addition, the legislature also provides regularly a GED subsidy or high school equivalency testing subsidy for test takers. So let's break some of this down. That 97% of state ABE aid that goes out to grantees or to consortia. So currently, under this year, we have 43 different grantees, and that goes out through a 4-part formula. Part 1 is the base aid for every consortia that has school district members. That's $173 per resident, and so that eats up about $9 million of that $49 million. Then the other 3 parts are divided. 84% of what's left over goes out via contact hours, and that's the big chunk of our ABE funding. The other 2 chunks, about $3.2 million each, go out to the K-12, your district K-12 limited English proficiency rate, or that LEP rate, and your, according to the American Community Survey, your over 25 no diploma number of residents, and that's a rate there. So when you look at the big chunk of funding, contact hours, that contact hour rate is $6.05 this year, and we estimate that it will likely be about the same this next year.
We have a question. Will federal funding in Minnesota increase due to the recent federal budget that was passed, which included an increase in federal funds?
Yeah, when we get to the federal part, we can talk about that, but on the surface, I can say we don't know. That growth is, I believe, about 7%. But the problem is the feds distribute all of that all the funding out according to need, what they determine as need, and that's basically the number of adults that do not have diplomas. Our percentage nationally of adults without diplomas is not growing, it's shrinking. Other states have more high school dropouts and more adults without diplomas, and so they continue to see a larger share of the federal funding. Our part typically tends to shrink. So even with a 7% growth in federal funding, I don't know that we'll see any growth in federal funding from this year to next year. But at least that should hopefully prevent further loss. Going back to state funding, we do have a growth factor that's built in, and that's set up for basically a statewide 10-year average growth in contact hours. But the unfortunate thing right now is when we look at the past 10 years, where our average growth annually is 0%, which means we're not getting any of that up to 3% growth right now, which is really unfortunate. And this is the first time since the formula has been developed that we're not seeing any growth to our overall state funding.
So we want to take a second to talk about supplemental service grants.
So that's that 3%.
Right. As Brad mentioned, 3% of the state funding goes directly into supplemental services. So we want everybody, first of all, we want to remind everybody that there are supplemental services available, and those are services that are provided to the field as a whole across the state. Those are competitive grants. So while we are used to, many of our supplemental service providers have been providers for a while, it is important to know that those are competitive grants, and we do compete them every couple of years. And we are currently in, there is currently a competition in process. So we have these 7 grants that were posted in April. Proposals were due on May 4th, so they have been submitted. So we are now in the review process. We did ask for reviewers, so thank you to those of you who volunteered to review. And we will be announcing our newest round of supplemental service providers once that review process is completed.
Also, one chunk of that is state funding is a separate allocation for subsidy for high school equivalency testing. This current year, we have $125,000 that was allocated by the legislature to pay for $10 off the first test in each subject using the code MN ABE 10. Like I said before, make sure your students know about that code. Regarding this year's legislature, there were actually 2 conflicting proposals. One had that same $125 and the same percentage, $10 off per test, up to $40 per tester. But there was another proposal to actually fully pay for the GED test, and they had originally allocated $403,000, actually even more than that potentially. And at this point, I'm not sure where that is within the legislature, so stay tuned for updated information from the legislature and the funding bills, or the education bills. That is everything on the state ABE side for grants. Now let's flip over to the federal ABE funding. So our federal ABE funding is in 2 chunks. So regular ABE funds are $5 million for federal, and then we have the IEL Civics, that's almost under $1 million. Within that federal money that we get, that $5 million, 17.5% actually helps fund the majority of our staff at the state ABE office through leadership and administration activities. The rest of that, the 82.5%, flow through to ABE providers, and that gets divvied out into 3 chunks. First is regional transitions funding, so $450,000 gets divvied out that way to each of our 10 regions throughout the state. Then there's also local technology aid to each grantee. That includes database management support, accountability aid, and distance learning licenses. Much of that funding, that equates to about $8 per enrollee overall, by and large, Much of that though you get charged you get charged by the Minnesota Literacy Council for your distance learning licenses, your SID support, and SID license as well. So most of that money goes right back out to help fund those accountability pieces for you. But some of you do have some additional funding through that that you can utilize. Then the vast majority of it then goes out to you through program funding for your ABE, for the federal ABE providers, grantees based on your contact hours. And then regarding the IEL Civics Education, that is a separate competitive grant application process, and we're currently in year 2 of that. So with that money that goes out, we do have 41 grantees that receive federal funding, and all of you 41 grantees are receiving a whopping 53 cents per contact hour from the prior year. So that's literally 2 quarters and 3 pennies per contact hour with each student, that's why we're so thankful that we have the state funding that we do have. Within that regional transitions aid, there are 10 different regions, and these are the regions as well as the fiscal agent for each of those regions. Reminder to everyone that we're starting year 2 of a 2-year regional transitions plan, and revisions to your plan for the 18-19 year are due to the Department of Education on June 7th.
Yep, and also we want to remind current civics grantees, IELCE grants, that grants that are currently funded for this year there will need to be annual reports submitted, but you can continue those grants for a second year, those activities for a second year through June 2019. Be watching for a report form that will be sent out to you in May. And our next competition for IELCE grants will be in 2019. So here we're just kind of giving you an overview of the applications that you need to have on your radar as an ABE program. So just an overview of kind of remember that all of these exist and be aware of them. So there is, of course, the annual ABE application, and that's for renewing your state and federal funds, and that comes around every year. It's due on June 1st. That's the one that's submitted and served. Then once every 5 years, there's a more extensive piece to that application, and that is your 5-year narrative. That's actually your reauthorization to receive ABE funding. So once every 5 years, you need to do that. In addition to those 2 pieces that all consortia have to do, there is also the IELCE funds, which is a grant competition, so that's optional. And that grant is competed for now every 2 years. Then you will probably remember that last year we did the federal competitive application, which was all consortia in the field, and I know that was a lot of work for all of us. We did that in 2017. The good news is, for now, we don't have to do that again soon. It's a little uncertain when exactly we will have to do that again, but we will be sure to let you know. So for now, kind of put that one aside in terms of we won't need to do that one exactly again, but it is important to note that the new narrative, the narrative has been revised, and much of what was in many things that were included in the federal competitive application are now also included in the narrative. So once you are writing your narrative, you will be looking back at that application to potentially use some of those pieces. And of course, then there are other grants that many ABE programs consider applying for, like, for example, the Pathways to Prosperity grants, but those are obviously administered by other agencies. So a little more information and some reminders about 5-year narrative. So because the federal competitive application last year, there was sort of a break from the regular 5-year schedule, but we are now back on track with everybody submitting a narrative once every 5 years. This is the list of programs that are currently diligently working on finishing up their narrative to be submitted on the June 1st deadline. This is the list of consortia that are required to submit a narrative in 2019. And I have reached out to each of these consortia just to kind of remind you about that, because one important thing to know, if you are in the list of narrative writing consortia for 2019, you need to have staff participate in the narrative review for this year's narratives. So that will take place in June. The narratives will all be online narratives this year, so reviewers will receive the link to the narratives to be reviewed and then review those on your own time during the first couple weeks of June, and then all reviewers will come together for an in-person review session here at MDE in Roseville on June 21st. So you should have received an email from Sherry asking for registration for reviewers. I know many folks from these 2019 narrative programs have signed up. I will also be sending out an email very soon to that cohort of next year's narrative writers, just to remind you about that and make sure we have all of your folks registered. In addition to the people who are, or the consortia who are required to review narratives, we definitely are interested in other folks. Reviewing narratives is a great way to just learn more information about other programs across the state. So we consider it a very worthwhile experience, even if you're not required to. So you can look for an email from Sherry that was dated April 12th that has all the details about how to register to be a reviewer, or certainly you can reach out and contact me directly if you're interested in reviewing.
Okay, now let's dive into the annual ABE grant application and the details. So one quick thing I want to note is that the Minnesota Department of Education got a new website address, and it is education.mn.gov. And I have to admit, I'm still getting used to it because I give that over the phone daily, and I've been messing it up a couple times. So remember, education.mn.gov. So within the application, and you can see this in your materials today as well, if you click on the materials, you'll see that we have provided for you a copy of the application itself, the instructions, and the tables. I believe I might have misspoken when I said the application is a Word document, because I think they are now PDFs, if I recall correctly. Yep, it is a PDF. So that's one change here, that the application the instructions are a PDF. The application is still a Word document. And it's important to note that the application does need to be submitted in Microsoft Word, and the tables do need to be submitted in Microsoft Excel. The application and the tables need to be submitted via SERVs. So let's take a minute. Basically, the application is very similar to previous years. We're not going to actually walk through the application, but if you download it and have any questions, feel free to ask us any questions when we get to the end of the session. But we do want to take some time just to remind you about the tables. So let's start with Table A. Table A is the same as last year. The only change that you'll see from last year's is remember that work-based project learner was in existence for part of the year last fiscal year. It has not been in existence for this fiscal year, so it is no longer on Table A. And one of the changes we made last year is that ABE Level 5 and ABE Level 6, they are now eligible for state and federal funding, which is why they're just up above and not down below like they used to be a couple years ago. In addition, let's talk about Table 7. Table 7 is the staffing table, and this one does get a little complex and it gets a little confusing, so I apologize, but you can blame the feds for that if you want. So first off, this is the one where we want you to calculate all of your staffing. If you're entering your staffing in SID, you can actually print this out and just transfer the numbers over to the Excel table. It should be calculating for you. If you're not entering your staff and volunteers into SID, you will need to hand count this yourself. So we strongly encourage you to start entering your staff into SID so that it will calculate this table for you, as well as other benefits ideally for you. As you calculate your staff and volunteers, it's the first lines 10, 11, and 12 are asking you for your administrative, supervisory, and ancillary service staff, your local counselors, and your local paraprofessionals. With those three types of entities, we want to see how many part-time, how many full-time, and how many unpaid volunteers you had in those categories. And we're also looking at that is the amount you have budgeted. Basically, at any one given point in time during the year, how many of those would you have in your organization or in your consortium? Teachers, they wanted something different. The feds wanted that calculated differently. There, they want to know how many total part-time teachers, how many total full-time teachers did you have throughout the entire year? So, and the reason that number would be different is, let's say you had one part-time teacher and they left and you replace them with another part-time teacher. Well, budgeting-wise, that would be one part-time teacher. You have to count that as two part-time teachers on this table in line 14 because they want to see a total number of teachers that have worked in ABE during that program or during that fiscal year. And then the experience down below, that is the same as prior years.
Any questions about Table 7? Nope, not seeing anything coming in.
Okay. If you have questions, you can type them in or raise your hand, and we'll get to your questions this session yet. So then we've spent already some time talking about Table 13, the funding table. But just this is the table that you're going to outline all of your funding. So B, it's the total number of providers that you have in that categories, and that you're including the grantee or the fiscal agent. So you total those up, and then of those entities, how much federal funding are they getting? Like all of your school districts would be under local education agencies. How much federal funding are they getting? And how much state funding are they getting total? Don't worry about the percentages. That will calculate automatically, as well as the consortium totals. Those should calculate automatically as well.
Any questions?
Any questions about the funding table? This one is identical to last year.
Okay.
And then we've already talked about Table B, which is the members and programming sites table, the new one. And so that is listed here, putting all of your district's members in column A, the district number if it is a district, and noting whether or not that's a subrecipient, and then all of your programming sites and addresses under the entity that operates that site.
So before we move on, are there any questions about the application and the tables?
You can either chat in or raise your hand if you've got a more complicated question, and we'll unmute you.
Okay, well, we're going to keep going then.
Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end too.
Yep. So we just have some reminders for you about your data and some SID things. So just generally setting an expectation that your data should be entered within approximately a month. And when we say data, what we are talking about is new students, pre-test, post-test, attendance, diplomas, local diplomas that are earned that you're entering. So that could be a standard adult diploma or a credit completion diploma, and all of your NRS required information. So just a reminder, sort of a baseline expectation is you would be keeping that up to date within about a month or so. And we've actually already mentioned this a little bit too, but just again, a reminder, you may have already had experience with this, but there is now basically a lock on the data entry for contact hours and tests in the data system so that you won't be able to enter old tests if they are older than 3 months. If for some reason there is something that, it was a mistake, it should have been entered earlier, but it wasn't, and now you need to enter it, that's fine, no problem. Just go ahead and contact the SID support people and they will help you do that. This is just quick examples of how that works and the timeline. I'd be interested to hear if anybody has had any issues with this. But so far, I feel like what we've been hearing at the regionals is that, yes, a few times staff have come up against this lock, but you've been able to get what you need done by contacting the support staff. So let us know if there's any issues or concerns about this, but we feel like this has rolled out pretty smoothly so far. Okay. So another update about SID that has not started yet, but is coming soon, and that is starting July 1st. You will no longer be able to enter attendance for a student who doesn't have an entry level. You won't be able to enter attendance past 12 hours. So remember that our policy is that all students need to be pre-tested within their first 12 hours of instruction. So we've just kind of formalized that within the data system so that the data system will no longer allow you to take attendance for a student who doesn't have a level. So again, hopefully this will just be a really good check. It could be, you know, that it will catch an error, a data entry error, or just a mistake that something should have been entered that wasn't.
It would also be under those situations where if you have students that have been attending for a long time, that have been attending so long that their pretest all of a sudden becomes invalid because it's so old, this will be another check on that to remind you that they need a new pretest then.
Yep, exactly. So that's one update. And then the second piece of this is if you have students who are marked conditional work referral, so if you are, you know, serving those students that are referred from your workforce center, our policy is that conditional work referral students can only receive 30 hours of instruction or less. So again, we've just formalized that into the data system. So once this is put in place, you will no longer be able to enter hours of attendance past 30 hours for a student who's marked conditional work referral. So we know that sometimes what happens is you get a student as conditional work referral, you realize they have general ABE instructional needs, and they sort of transfer over to be just a regular ABE student, which is fine and great in many cases. You'll just need to remember that someone has to go into their record and unmark them as conditional work referral, and you may need to make sure they are being pre and post tested appropriately. So this will just be sort of an extra reminder to do that way.
And we have a question, when teachers are entering attendance, will they get an alert that the student needs a test in this circumstance?
So my understanding is they will get an alert or they will get an error message that they will not be able to continue entering the attendance. So yes, then the teacher will need to, you may want to think internally about what your process will be and how you will train your teachers of what to do. Yep. When they see that message.
I believe it's going to say that they don't have an EFL, a valid EFL anymore. Okay. But if you want to know the exact verbiage or what that alert looks like, we encourage you to talk to the Urban Planet staff. Mary Zimmerly or Jenny can really help you. Will help you brainstorm that and help you know what the exact verbiage is within SID.
Yeah, and Jenny's on now. She says it will be similar to the alert that pops up now when time is given to a student who already has time at that time.
Already has time at that time.
So if
attendance hours.
In other words, yeah. Right, the error message that you get when you try to enter double time.
Yep.
Yeah. You can't enter time for somebody who already has time at that time.
Thank you, Jenny, for quickly answering that question and and being very quick with that. Thank you. It's great having you on these webinars with us and at these sessions with us.
Okay. Also, we want to sort of give you a sense of the points throughout the year at which it's really important to have your data all clean and looking good. So of course, June 1st is an important date, as you already know, because that's the date at which you have to submit your annual application, and you do that via SERVS. So June 1st is an important point where everything needs to look good and clean. July 31st is also another important point where everything needs to be cleaned up. After July 31st, you will submit your level gain report, and that will be emailed to Sherry, and you will get notice about that this summer. So July 31st is another important point where everything needs to be complete and accurate. And then third point is November 1st. That's another point in the year where you need to make sure that data is accurate and complete. There is nothing for you to submit at that point to us here at MDE, but just know that in the fall is when our office is pulling and compiling data in order to submit the reporting that we have to do to the Federal Department of Education. So we need everything to be updated again at that point. So at each of those 3 points that I mentioned are points at which we are pulling data out of SID, and we need that data to be accurate and complete. Okay.
So let's talk about one of our other favorite topics this spring and for the 18-19 year, and that's tests. So we do have some new tests that have been approved by the feds, and we're requesting approval for them from the federal government for our use. First is the CASA's Goals Reading Test. CASA's Reading Goals was announced this spring, this winter, that it was approved for ABE levels 1 through 6 for reading. We are currently reviewing it, but materials are not available. We don't have it built into SID. We're hoping that everything will be ready for its approval and its use at year end around July 1st, 2018. But stay tuned. And TABE 11 and 12 has been approved by the federal government. And so there, with the TABE 11 and 12, there are computer versions and paper versions. Both are currently available for purchase. There are 3 subjects to the TABE, reading, math, and language. And just like TABE 9 and 10, there are 5 levels, L, E, M, D, A. And that's L is at the easiest level and A is the most advanced level. One difference I'm just going to let you know is that the most programs currently have not been using the L. Under the new 11-12 version, the L will actually be more important, and I think we'll see a lot more students that will need that L level of test, especially as they realign to the new standards. We were just looking through that this past week with our SPARK group and with the professional development, Professional Development Committee, and everyone was saying, wow, these tests are longer and more challenging or more academic than the last version, than the 9-10. It's important to know that each test only has one option in terms of length. There's no survey and complete battery anymore. It's just one length, one option for each level in each form. We are currently working with SPARK, our Urban Planet team, and others to review them and get them entered into SID and ready so that programs could start using them July 1. We did just get notice we did just find out from the feds that our assessment policy has been reviewed, and so it looks like it's approved that we can use TABE 11 and 12, and so we're going to resubmit with CASAs once we have the information for CASAs. It's important to also to know about TABE 9 and 10 that the feds have tentatively dropped its approval in 2019, meaning the 18-19 year is the last year that we can use TABE 9 and 10 probably. Starting July 1, 2019, it will be likely that all programs will no longer be able to use 9 and 10 and will have to move on for ABE levels to either TABE 11 and 12 or the CASA's Goals Test for reading. So here's some of the initial breakdowns of time, but I just want to tell you that these are tentative, and these are the time that they say is the maximum allowable time. We also are getting conflicting numbers and adjustments to these numbers, so this is all still very tentative at this point. But you can see here what the math, reading, and language, the locator time, and the maximum allowable test time for the actual test was originally written. Please note that those are estimates. They seem to be changing because a lot of people were balking at the reading 130 minutes for that test. Even though it was a maximum allowable time, it doesn't mean that students have to take that much time. In fact, many students anecdotally were taking still about an hour to finish the test. But because programs were really balking at that, TABE seems, DRC, which owns the TABE, they seem to be adjusting how they're their time, maximum allowable time limits.
And another important thing that we are learning about the new TABE is both the math and the reading are divided into two parts, and it is acceptable to administer the two parts separately. So for a math test, that 75 minutes is telling you the total time for two parts of the test, but it is possible to administer the first part, which might be 40 minutes, and then have the student take a break, or administer that on one day and on another day administer the second part, which is 30 minutes. So just an FYI, both the math and the reading work that way, that they have two parts. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a student has to sit in one chair and do that same test without stopping for 130 minutes. So something to keep in mind.
Yep. We did have a question about cost estimates. I do not have the cost estimates on me, but they for TABE, they are posted at www.tabetest.com. But I have heard that they're more expensive, anecdotally. And before you get to actually buying the test, couple things that I want you to know. One, TABE 9 and 10 are not the same. You can't, if someone pre-tests on a TABE 9 or 10, you cannot post-test them on a TABE 11 or 12. They're considered different tests altogether. It's as if you're giving someone a math test and a reading test. They're just different. Or a CASAS or a TABE. They're different series. You can't use them interchangeably as a pre and post test situation. So the difficulty to that is that their pre-test in 9 or 10 is not applicable as a post-test then for 11 and 12, but the benefit is that if your program wants to start using 11 and 12, you don't have to wait till a student gets 40 hours since their last 9 or 10 TABE assessment to give them an 11 or 12. You can actually give them a brand new pre-test at any time, but it would be considered their first 11 or 12, TABE 11 or 12, will be considered a new pre-test. The other thing we want you to know before you buy any test, with supplemental services, we have entered into the grant requirements and request that there will be that the assessment and training services supplemental service provider will act as a broker to coordinate central purchasing of tests for CASAS goals and TABE 11 and 12, paper-based and computer-based with local programs. What that means is you'll once we announce who those grantees are, and probably late summer, early fall, each consortium, each grant program will get an email maybe from us, but on behalf of that grantee, and saying, hey, we're looking at ordering some TABE tests or some CASAS goals tests. Which programs are interested, and then getting estimates or numbers from each of the programs that are interested, and then that supplemental service provider can bulk all those together to get the best price available, the bulk rate. Instead of like a smaller program would have to pay a lot more per test than say a larger program. This way everyone could get that cheapest rate possible for the bulk rates. And so that will start, like I said, late summer, early fall. So we really encourage people to not buy the test now unless you really gung-ho and feel that your consortium really needs them now. But remember, they're not approved until at least July 1, 2018. SID is not yet set up to take those new tests, so don't rush out too fast. But we really encourage you to try to use this bulk purchasing or this central purchasing option.
We also had a question about professional development around the new tests. There will be a variety of testing-focused sessions at Summer Institute, both TABE and CASAS implementation training, which will include a bit of information about the new test, as well as sessions focused on the changes to the new test. So that will be the first ABE-sponsored opportunity for training. There are also webinars currently being held by TABE about the new test. If you go on to the PD calendar, you can find information. I know that there's one, for example, next week that TABE is holding about the new test. Yeah. And then we anticipate that there will be assessment sessions at the regionals throughout the year next year. And then as part of our assessment supplemental service provider services, programs are also able to request on-site training around the test.
Yep. And there will also be test training for both CASAS and TABE at the Support Services Conference in November.
Yep. Yeah. So we have a lot of test certification and what's new with testing sessions planned through a lot of through as many venues as possible next year. So as you were thinking about this and with testing, you'll want to start thinking about budgeting, and you'll want to really start planning within your local program. 3 key questions. When are you going to purchase the test? How will you train and make sure everyone is trained and ready to use the new test? And that might be certification and or some local procedure developments. And how are you going to implement that? And you might want to think differently, or maybe how are current tests when are they going to transfer, and how and when are new students going to transfer to the new test?
So any other questions about testing before we move on?
Nothing coming in.
Okay.
Okay. Our final section for the day before we get to questions is financial reporting. And so there's a little bit of quiz, so I'm encouraging you to chat in your answers. And for those of you that have been paying attention, you might have noticed these are the same questions as last year, but we still see these issues pop up every single year. So for question 1, start chatting in your answer. What is the last date that expenses can be claimed against state fiscal year 18 federal revenue? Marilyn got it right off the bat. Yep, June 30th. Excellent. And then number 2, what is the deadline for actually drawing all state fiscal year 18 federal funds? Let's see the answer. People are a little more hesitant on this one. So, yep, you were correct on the June 30th. That's the last day that expenses can be claimed against federal revenue. And then October 1st is the deadline to actually draw those funds. Next question. What is the deadline for submitting your annual grant application materials into SERVS? If you don't know this one, I'm very concerned right now. Excellent. Yep, June 1st. And then you don't need to chat in the answer here, but there are 2 steps that must be done after everything is submitted to SERVS, after your agency head signs off to submit the application. Now, later this summer, once we're getting to the point where we actually have the allocations loaded to your grant, there are 2 things that must be done. First, your agency head, whether it's a superintendent or whoever, they must accept the funds in SERVS under the Manage Allocations and Budget section. And then, once the allocation has been accepted, you need to create a budget so that you can start drawing the funds. And remember that the budget draws and your UFAR's expenditures that you code need to match.
Brad, just one detail about the June 1st annual application deadline. This year, the grants department here at MDE has decided that the time cutoff is 3:30 p.m.
Yep,
so
that is new.
Know that because it's been midnight or late in the day.
Yep.
Other years, but this year the deadline that they have set is 3:30 p.m. So please don't leave it until 3 o'clock on that date, because you will probably regret that.
Yep. And yeah, that causes major problems if you do not get your grant in on time, and potentially it could mean that you don't get your grant if it doesn't get in on time. So we strongly encourage you to get that in early. Do not wait till the 1st.
Yeah.
Ideally, you can get your agency head. And every year almost every year we see an issue where, our agency head is out at a funeral or out with this or out with that. So please get this in as early as possible. Okay. One of our next questions: when are final fiscal report for the federal and state portion of your annual ABE grant, your award, when are they due, those fiscal reports? Excellent, Marilyn. You seem to know this very well. Yep, November 15th is the date that when your final expenditure reports are due. And one of our final questions, for those of you that carry over state funding into the next, from this current fiscal year into the first quarter of the next fiscal year, which that's several of our grantees do that, there's a couple things that you need to do. I appreciate those that have the honesty to say E, so good, thank you. So if you're one of those entities, you need to C, talk to your business manager, and D, nope, that wasn't right.
Yep, sorry. B, you need to B.
B, talk to your business manager, and D, change the course code. So B and D are the answer. You need to talk to your business manager, and you need to change that course code. We do have programs every now and then that don't change that course code. And what happens then is you end up losing that funding if you do not use the correct course code. So make sure you talk with your business manager and make sure that's course coded correct so that you actually get the funds and you don't lose them. Here's a special note on fiscal monitoring. Any competitive grant that is over $50,000 during the life of the grant, there is a requirement for fiscal monitoring, and you will be sent that fiscal monitoring tool from our grants department or fiscal department when the time comes. For more grant information, you'll notice that we don't put our own names on here, but we encourage you to talk to people far more knowledgeable in this area. Namely, Tim Larson is our primary contact for grants. So any grant question that you have that should come to MDE, we really encourage you to go to Tim first. He's quick about answering emails typically, and this is his first year on this, so he's still learning the ropes, just as many of you might be. But we also encourage you to talk to your other colleagues, ABE managers, and also your business office. Make sure you have a good connection with your business office on this. And you can always check out the grants page on the NDE website. As we look ahead to this next year, take a minute to look at these four points that we have for each of you. You'll notice that these are the same 4 points that we had looking forward to the next year. We really encourage you all to increase your collaborations in your career pathway programming and your partnerships. We really are encouraging you to integrate those ABE content standards at all levels. And we're continuing to implement those WIOA accountability expectations. This year, the new aspect to that is going to be the tests. The tests are changing. So that's going to be the key aspect there. But overall, most importantly, thank you for all of your hard work. It's amazing how much work this has been. And so thank you for all of the hard work and the continuous evolution and growth under all of this change that we've seen. I really encourage you to download all of the materials that are located. There are 5 different materials, including the 3 grant application materials, the
PD committee application,
and the PowerPoint. And all the materials should be listed, and this recording will be posted on the Literacy Action Network website. Thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for getting your applications in on time by June 1st at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations that you'll get after this webinar. Our next web chat is scheduled tentatively for July 11th. That's a Wednesday again. July 11th, 2018 from 1 to 2:30. Stay tuned. We'll send out details closer to the date. And here's our emails and contact for any questions you might have. And so let's open up the lines and see, you can chat in any questions that you have or raise your hand and we'll unmute you to ask any questions you might have at this point.
We have a question. Are we required to put all of our volunteers into SID?
It is not at this point yet a requirement. However, we strongly encourage you to enter your volunteers into SID. That helps so that you can actually print out your MLC volunteer report, as well as it helps you with Table 7. It is not yet required by our office, but it is strongly encouraged that you do that.
Any other questions? You can chat them in or raise your hand. Carla, I think we can probably